Right. Story time today. You can sit where you are and hang with your folks. Story today is from a book that I have been reading recently entitled Footprints of the Pioneers. It's got a lot of nice little stories in it. The basis for this story was the author actually traveled to where these stories took place. So he kind of fills in, talks about the people that were alive when he wrote this book, 1947. So it's been a while. Some of those folks would maybe some of the younger ones would still be around, but probably not too many of the ones even mentioned then. So he's going back in history and he's telling us a story. And this particular chapter I wanted to tell has to do with a young man who was 21 years of age at the time of the story. 21. And his name was Jaime.
In his 90s, late 90s.
His name was Jaime. Well, or actually in English we call him James. James. Okay, and the story it starts off with a song. This is a song that he and his sister sang when they were staying with somebody. They sang one of these old Adventist hymns. It's, "You will see your Lord a-comin', you will see your Lord a-comin', you will see your Lord a-comin' in a few more days. Hear the band of singing, hear the band of singing, hear the band of singing that is ringing through, sounding through the air." Yeah, it's a very spirited song. He sang that. Well, the story is of the first time he went preaching. Little background to the story, but I'm going to jump right here to this first time. It's at a country schoolhouse where he delivered some of his first lectures. And you would think that people would be positive about the Advent. You know, that's a good thing. That's a hopeful thing. They didn't want to hear him. And people had a way back in those days of letting you know they didn't want to hear you. He met a mob on 2 successive nights. It was in the winter. The snow was deep and heavy. Yet the schoolhouse was packed with people, mostly women, and they had all the windows out. And outside, the unruly mob howled and threw snowballs and other projectiles. One of them was a big spike, and it hit the preacher in the head. The second evening, he was warned that the mob would take his life. They didn't like him that much. He was afraid. They were afraid that he was going to take his life. But he prayed about it, and he decided to go ahead. A Universalist, that's a certain kind of church, whose selected preacher had been rebuffed the previous evening, stood by the pulpit, shaking his fist and crying, "Your meetings will be broken up." So somebody's going to come in here and going to break it up. And James said, "As God wills." So he hung up his chart. That's the way they preached back in those days. They didn't have projectors and pretty illustrations like I have today, but put up a big chart so he could point to the different things on the chart. He sang an Advent hymn, maybe the one that I just sang for you, and that we're going to do together a little bit later. With some voices joining in, he prayed, and then he started to preach. But the mob howled him down. Can you imagine trying to talk above the crowd, the yelling? Finding he could not be heard, he stopped his lecture, and raising his voice above the howls and catcalls, he entered upon an impassioned description of the judgment day. Started talking about how that God's going to judge them for their behavior. And the mob quieted. And then he cried out, "Repent and call on God for mercy and pardon. Turn to Christ and get ready for his coming. Or in a little from this, on rocks and mountains you will call in vain. You scoff now, you will pray then." The noise sank. Taking from his pocket that iron spike, he held it up in view. And he said, "Some poor sinner cast its spike at me last evening. God pity him. The worst wish I have for him is that he is at this moment as happy as I am. Why should I resent this insult when my master had them driven through his hands? And suiting the action to the word, he stepped back against the wall with his arms elevated in the posture of one hanging on a cross. And the noise died. Some shrieked. A groan came from the crowd. Hark, hark, which means listen, listen. And inspired by his subject, the young preacher called upon repentant sinners to rise for prayers. And nearly 100 there stood. Then they knelt with him, and he prayed with them. And then, taking his chart and his Bible, he stepped through the crowd and out the door. Now, that's not the end of the story. The mob outside stilled and cowed, yet were vengeful, and they pressed toward him. But a man of noble countenance, familiar yet unknown, came to his side, locked arms with him, and they advanced. The crowd gave way, their missiles dropped from their hands, and shortly James and his companion were outside the fringes of the mob. He turned to thank his rescuer, and no one was there.
Wow.